Halloween may be behind us, but that doesn't mean you might not be faced with some scary start-sit decisions for your fantasy football lineup here in Week 10. I got 10 players that, if you need to, you can consider starting them. These are guys with advantageous matchups. Now, I do want to make it clear, I'm not saying these guys are must-starts. I'm not saying you should start them. I'm not saying, you want to start them, but you might have to, and at least they have potential in their matchups here in Week 10. Again, if you have to. And let's start at running back, and it's crazy that Kenneth Walker is a guy you do not feel good having in your lineup, but that's just how it's been this year, right? It's been a very even split between him and Zach Charbonnet. Zach Charbonnet been vulturing the goal line touches, but we saw an interesting shift in Week 9. We saw more Kenneth Walker than Zach Charbonnet. Now, I know the game was a blowout. I know they were, easily in control pretty much the entire game, but look at the usage in the first half when they were still playing like to win the football game. They weren't incomplete, like, okay, we got this, we don't need to do anything mode. Kenneth Walker had played 63% of the snaps, handled 54.5% of the attempts, and ran 50% of the routes. But what's even more important to me and a more significant to me is he got the only 2 inside the 5 carries in this game. Now, is this something we can bet on going forward? Is this a for sure change, or was just this one game? Well, we don't know, unfortunately, but you know what? Kenneth Walker's a talented player. I want to find out in my fantasy lineup. And it's not a terrible spot this week going up against the Arizona Cardinals. No, they're not a pushover on defense, but they're also not a shutdown run defense. Not to mention the Seahawks are 6.5-point favorites at home, which means this could be a game where they're easily in control, running the football plenty, especially in the second half. So after the usage we saw from Kenneth Walker last week, and betting on the talent of this guy and in a good enough matchup, I want to find out. Again, don't think Kenneth Walker is anything close to a must start this week, but I think there are much, much worse options if you're desperate at your RB2 spot. And one of those worse options that I still think is playable this week is Devin Singletary of the New York Giants. So much for Tyrone Tracy becoming the RB1 again in New York. You look at it last week, Devin Singletary outsnapped him 55% to 44%. Handled more attempts, 38% of the attempts versus 23% of the attempts. Now, sure, Tyrone Tracy did run a few more routes, right? 46.2% to 35.9%, but this was still a very even split. And Devin Singletary actually looked better than Tyrone Tracy last week running the football. But to make matters worse here, Singletary got the only inside the 10 carry and the only inside the 10 target. So if anybody was going to score last week, it was going to be Devin Singletary. Look, I said all offseason after they drafted Cam Skattebo, Tyrone Tracy is just a guy. He's very replaceable. We've already seen him be replaced by Cam Skattebo. Could we see him being replaced again by Devin Singletary? Not going to go that far just yet because, look, Devin Singletary, he's also just a guy. But he was better than Tyrone Tracy last week. And the Giants we have seen over the last couple of years, they have trust and faith in Devin Singletary. And it's a great spot for, both these guys really, but especially Devin Singletary this week against the Chicago Bears run defense. Because you look at it, Devin Singletary has been much better on those man gap runs, averaging over 4 yards per carry, which isn't anything, incredible. But look, Cam Skattebo was only averaging 4.3 yards per carry on those runs. This is a Giants running game. It's not going to be amazing, but he's got a 60% success rate on those runs. The Bears allow 5.4 yards per carry on those man gap runs versus just 4.6 on zone runs. So this matchup actually does benefit Singletary more than Tyrone Tracy. I think both these guys are flexes this week. I don't love either of them, to be honest, but if I had to choose one, I would probably choose Devin Singletary. And if you're desperate, you could roll him out there as your RB2. And then if you're even more desperate, you could take a chance on Woody Marks this week. The gap between Woody Marks and Nick Chubb has been closing over the weeks. And look at last week. Woody Marks outsnapped Nick Chubb 47% to 36%. The attempts were very close here. I think Nick Chubb only had one more attempt, but Woody Marks ran significantly more routes, 34% to 19%. Now, unfortunately, last week, Woody Marks did not catch a pass, but you look at it over the previous 4 games, he had caught at least 3 passes in 3 of those games. We know he's got that in him. And now he gets a Jaguars defense that has been very good versus the run, but they're allowing the 14th most receptions, the 7th most yards, and they're tied for the 2nd most receiving touchdowns to running backs. This is a good spot for pass catching running backs, and that's what Woody Marks is. So if you're in a PPR league, I wouldn't start Woody Marks in a non-PPR league. But if you're in a PPR league, he's got potential this week. Not to mention Nick Chubb dealing with some sort of foot injury. Of course, when I'm recording this, I don't know if Nick Chubb is going to play or not. You might know by the time you watch this, but even if Nick Chubb does play, you got to worry about him being limited with this foot injury here, maybe leaving the game at some point. So there's a chance for Woody Marks here, especially in the receiving game, but maybe to even pick up more work on the ground in this matchup. Not a smash matchup against the Jags, but a good enough matchup here. Again, if you're looking for a PPR flex or running back 2 and you're really digging deep, Woody Marks could come through for you. Before I move on to wide receivers, I just want to say if you're enjoying this video or any of the videos we're putting out for you, please take one moment, hit that subscribe button. We'd greatly appreciate it. We're trying to get to 100K subscribers by the end of the season. It's not looking good for us. We need all the help we can get. Take one moment and subscribe to the channel. We'd appreciate it. All right, let's move on to wide receivers now, and I think you got to take a chance on QJ this week. Look, last week, nobody took a chance on QJ, of course, coming off a goose egg, but he had a nice game. I like him again this week, and no, not just because he showed up randomly last week, because he could randomly disappear again. We know this, but it's a good matchup here against the Steelers. The Steelers play the 6th most man coverage and the 3rd most single high. You look at it this year versus man, he leads the team in fantasy points per route run. And versus single high, he is 2nd behind only Keenan Allen in fantasy points per route run. So this is good schematic matchup for Quentin Johnston this week. Plus, the Steelers allow the 2nd most fantasy points to wide receivers lined up out wide. Quentin Johnston runs 85% of his routes from out wide. Yes, QJ is always risky to go out there and just lay a complete egg and kill your week. But again, he's got upside, and this is a good matchup for QJ. So I think it's worth taking a shot on him again here in week 10 if you need to. And another guy who showed up randomly out of nowhere last week, Jameson Williams, is in another good spot this week to randomly show up. Now, again, this is a guy who could absolutely kill you, give you nothing, but I think you got to take a chance on him against this Commanders defense. Now, I don't have any coverage shell things that are fantasy points against to say, yeah, look, this matches up great for Jameson Williams. Other than it's the Commanders here. Like, he wasn't really more involved last week, only a 15% target share. But I think against the Commanders, it's enough. Last week, they allowed 129 yards to Jackson Smith-Njigba, which is understandable. They gave up a 60-yard touchdown to Cody White and 2 touchdowns to Torrey Horton, including a 25-yard touchdown. Not to mention Marshawn Lattimore, who wasn't even really that good this year, to be honest, is out with an ACL injury. This defense is an absolute mess. The team is an absolute mess. The Lions should absolutely be able to take advantage of this. Jameson Williams always has the potential to hit on that big play, score a touchdown. I think in this matchup against this defense, it's worth taking a shot at him. I was kind of hesitant to put Alec Pierce on here because I've had him on here the last 2 weeks and he's been good, but I think this week he could even be better in this matchup this week against the Falcons, because the Falcons play the most single high coverage in the entire NFL. 73% of the time they run single high. You look at the Colts pass catchers this year against single high. He leads the team in targets per out run, yards per out run, and he's 2nd behind only Tyler Warren in fantasy points per out run. Then you look at him, just look at the raw stats here. He's got a 27% target share, which leads the team against single high. He has 16 catches, 362 yards, a 12.48 yards per target, and an insane 22.63 yards per reception against single high. And he's doing this despite the fact that he's run only the 3rd most routes against single high on the team this year. Plus, when you look at the Falcons secondary, you got to think AJ Terrell is probably going to be spending most of his time on Michael Pittman. And the Falcons' number 2 corner, Mike Hughes, has been terrible this year. He's graded 77th among corners in coverage, and he's dealing with a neck injury, so we don't even know if he's going to play. So if he's out, Alec Pierce might be facing the number 3 corner here. Look, you're starting Michael Pittman. I'm not out on Michael Pittman or anything, but I think you've got to take a chance on Alec Pierce again this week. He's actually does give you a floor this year. He's not just boom bust, but he's got the potential to boom, and he hasn't scored. I mean, this guy's going to score at some point, right? Touchdown regression is coming. Take a chance on Alec Pierce this week. And with the Bucs coming out of their bye, I think you got to take a chance on Tez Johnson this week. Look, Christian Gonzalez is probably going to shadow Emeka Egbuka, or at least spend a lot of time on Emeka Egbuka in this game. Because you look at it in week 8 with Mike Evans out, Sterling Shepard, Emeka Egbuka, and Tez Johnson, they all played, pretty much on the outside, but Egbuka almost 70% of the time on the outside. Obviously, him and Tez Johnson ran the most routes. Sterling Shepard kind of out there when they need him. They all do play a little bit in the slot, but Egbuka only 32% in the slot, so he's probably going to get a ton of Gonzalez on this game, which means Tez Johnson, who's out wide 60% of the time in Week 8, is going to get plenty of opportunities against Carlton Davis, who has absolutely been terrible this year. Right now, Carlton Davis ranks 97th out of 112 qualified corners in coverage grade. And according to PFF, on the season, he's allowed 24 catches, 283 yards, 3 touchdowns, and a 118.3 passer rating on 36 targets. This is a good spot for Tez Johnson to have a sneaky good game this week. We already know he has upside. We've already seen it. Plus, the Patriots are the toughest against running backs. They're allowing the fewest rushing yards in the NFL. Bucky Irving looking very unlikely to play. They may not be able to run the ball. They're going to have to throw it a ton in this game. I think Tez Johnson's got the kind of upside you're looking for if you need him. And then on the other side in the same matchup, I really like Demario Douglas this week as a sneaky start because the Pats may also be throwing the ball a ton because the Tampa Bay Buccaneers allow the 4th fewest rushing yards to running backs. And then we know the Pats can't run the ball anyways. So that's going to open up the door for Demario Douglas. And his role has changed significantly over the last month, going from a guy who's like, yeah, he may catch some passes, but he doesn't give you yards or touchdown, to a guy who can actually give you those big plays. Look at from Patriots beat writer Evan Lazar, what he tweeted out here. He said in the first 5 weeks, Douglas had an average target depth of 5.8 yards. He had 7 catches for 30 yards and a touchdown on 17 targets in those games. But the last 4 games, a 15.3 ADOT. He's caught 11 passes, 232 yards, and 2 touchdowns on 14 targets. His role has expanded in this offense to be more of a downfield threat. And with Kayshon Boutte potentially missing this game, that's going to open it up even more. I know a lot of people are going to get excited about rookie Kyle Williams, and he is probably the Boutte replacement. But last week, he was just running wind sprints. He wasn't getting targeted. Demario Douglas has that connection with Drake May. He's been a part of this offense all year. I think he's the guy I'm looking for. If I want to take a shot at somebody in this offense other than Stephon Diggs, and the way he's been used lately, he actually does give you upside. All right, now let's talk about a couple tight ends in case you need to stream tight end. Go out on the waiver wire, pick somebody up. Let's start with Harold Fannin Jr. I've talked about him as a buy low, but I also think he's a good start this week. And look, you might not even have to buy low on Harold Fannin because in your more shallower leagues, he's probably just sitting out there on your waiver wire. But not only is he a great option rest of the season because he's a fantastic schedule for tight ends, I think he's great this week too. The Jets play the 7th most man coverage, and he has been the best pass catcher on the Browns versus man. And look, I know Njoku didn't get traded, and we would have liked that, but Njoku's not been very good against man at all. You look at it this year, Harold Fannin is tied for the team lead in targets per route run with Jerry Jeudy. He leads the team in yards per route run and fantasy points per route run. Sorry, he's second in fantasy points per route run versus man. Meanwhile, David Njoku last in targets per route run, last in yards per route run, and I don't know, 4th or 3rd here in fantasy points per route run. Basically not very good against man. And just look at the raw stats. Fannin has a 16.3% target share against man, second only to Jerry Jeudy. He has the same number of catches as Jeudy, more yards, and 2 touchdowns, despite running over 30 less routes than Jerry Jeudy. Once again, David Njoku dead last, even behind Cedric Tillman, who missed a month on the IR in terms of stats against man coverage. This is a much more beneficial matchup for Harold Fannin than David Njoku. I think Fannin is a great streaming option for you this week. Or even if you don't like the tight end you have and Fannin's on your bench, I would start Fannin this week. I think he's got a very high floor for you with good upside this week. And finally, if you need to go a little bit deeper, let's take a shot on Juwan Johnson, who could be out there on a lot of waiver wires in your not extremely deep leagues. Over the last 3 games, he has 13 catches, 163 yards, and a touchdown. Now, last week, he didn't get a ton of targets, but it's because the Saints were obviously just targeting Rashid Shaheed to show the league, like, hey, look, come trade for Rashid Shaheed. And it worked. They traded him to Seattle. But that is good for Juwan Johnson because he's now clearly the number 2 target in this offense. And this offense does not run the football. On the season, the Saints rank 4th in pass play percentage. But over the last 3 games specifically, they rank number 1 at an absurd almost 72% pass play percentage. They don't even try to run the football anymore. They are just throwing it and throwing it and throwing it. And the Panthers do have a good run defense, and the Saints don't have a good run game, so they're probably going to throw it a lot again this week. With Johnson being the number 2 target in an offense that throws the ball a ton, he at least gives you a good floor. in your PPR leagues, and he's always got touchdown upside as well. So if you're really desperate at tight end, maybe you lost Tucker Kraft, go take a shot on Juwan Johnson this week. And if for some reason you haven't caught all the content we've put out for you this week to help you win, what are you doing? Well, don't worry, I got you covered. You can find it in our playlist. It's all right here.